Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 356 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Deb Schwartzkopf about her book, Creative Pottery. This is an excellent textbook for folks that are looking to expand their ceramic skills. We talk about using templates in today's interview and bisque molds and all sorts of other ways that you can make complex forms with very simple parts. If you'd like to find out more about the book or make a purchase, you can go to ratcitystudios.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank some of the folks that have been donating to our fall fund drive. I'd like to thank Malika Nash, Alan Maudsley, and Linda Arbuckle for their contributions. We are listener supported, so I couldn't make this show without folks like those. So thanks again to them for donating. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can do that at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Also wanted to do today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of the Pot LA GoFundMe campaign. Pot is a full-service studio owned and operated by artists of color with a mission to create a space that felt accessible and empowering to those that felt marginalized in other ceramic spaces. Due to the pandemic, Pot needs your help to keep their doors open for the next 6 months. You can help them directly at gofundme.com/help-pot. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So I wanted to start talking about your book, which congratulations that you finished a book. That's amazing.
Thanks. It felt like a really big accomplishment for me.
Yeah, can you talk about the planning process and the writing?
I have to say, I was really inspired by you and Sunshine writing your books, and I was like, I want to do that too. And I had just been teaching for so long, and having something that would sort of hold a lot of that knowledge in a way that people could look back on and be reminded of a class, or maybe if they're not in a class, just try something, that I wanted to have a tool like that. So that was my starting point. And organizing the information was pretty hard for me. It just felt really overwhelming at first. But I kind of just broke it down, and I did have the benefit of having written a few articles for Pottery Making Illustrated, and that gave me kind of this I already had some practice at organizing that information, but it was just way more. So I tried to organize the information to approach a bunch of different forms, but also use multiple different tools or techniques so that it sort of had this broad spectrum of things to try.
It's a beautiful book. Like, it's very well photographed, and your writing style is really nice. So it's easy to read, but it's a lot like a 20-course meal. You know, like you can jump in and just have a little snack here, or you can go for like 8 courses and read all of it at once. So can you talk about how you thought about density of information and how to make it accessible?
I have to say that a lot of that was my editor, Tom, helping it stay accessible. I tend to make things a little more complex than might be necessary. So I had that really awesome balancer to help that happen. It's amazing how many people make the book happen. I mean, of course, I wrote the book, but there was so many editors of all different sorts that it's a massive group project, really. But I really tried to start with basic forms and then build off of those. And that's how my body of work has evolved also, is I'll start with a more simple form, and then I'll get idea after idea that I could tweak it or add to it, and it becomes more and more complex. And then part of me loves that, and another part of me thinks, oh my gosh, I need something more simple to work on. And so I kind of go back to the drawing board, start with a more simple form, and continue to add variations, just because I find that to be really fun.
Yeah, and Tom was my editor as well, and because he makes pots, he understands, he can see the gaps that we're not seeing in our writing, which is super helpful.
Yeah, and some of the assumptions of what people may already know or not know, and that could be something that makes something approachable or less approachable if you miss some of that information. So yeah, working with him and getting feedback from other people was really crucial.
In one of the early sections of the book, before you actually even go into all of the different sort of assignments or ways to make the different forms, you talk about risk and failure. And I thought that was interesting, that was like your starting point. And you talk about it as if they're good things, like you need to take risks, and failure is the way you learn. So can you talk more about like putting that at the beginning of the book to get people used to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is just practical, where anytime I'm learning something new, the first try, it's the effort that's important, not the product. And so I want to set people up for that idea, because I want to be encouraging while people are learning. And anytime you have multiple parts, the chances for cracks go up. And so that's the reality, and I'm not going to try to hide that. So risking means extending yourself or extending your skill into an unknown area. And to me, that feels exciting. But then there's also a much higher chance that it won't be the product of a gallery, or like the first try won't be the shining star. It will be a pile, more likely, in a reclaim bin somewhere. But all of that effort and trying is, for me, one of the most exciting parts. And also, as time goes on, it gets easier, and then you do get a result that becomes something to keep. And anyway, yeah, I love the playful aspect of risk taking. And to me, that's what keeps my studio practice vibrant, and it makes me want to keep exploring.
You tell this funny story about eat the frog legs first, which, can you just say that in that story?
It's actually not my story. It's a story from a workshop participant when I was teaching at Idlewild. And the person suggested that they were at this awesome dinner, a dinner where they were a guest, and there was this great buffet or spread of food in front of them. And they wanted to be the helpful, or they wanted to be the honoring guest, and show appreciation. And there were frog legs, and that was not something that was palatable to them in their mind. And so that was the first thing they chose. Like, I'm going to get this challenging or less desirable step out of the way first, and then move on to all the things that are really drawing me. And then that would make it so the whole dinner could be enjoyed. And I loved that idea. And I try to embrace that in my studio, to try to do the thing that I want to do the least first, because otherwise I'll just procrastinate, put it off. But if I just tackle it, sometimes it's not as bad as it seems if I just get to it and then move on.
It's such a good motto for life, like, because each individual thing, you can survive anything. So if you just sit down and do the thing that's not as much fun, it always gives me a little bit of momentum, because I'm like, oh yes, I did it.
Yeah, and then it's sort of like downhill from there. From the challenging thing, like all the things you might want to try might still be effortful, but after doing something you don't want, they feel like more of a pleasure.
One of the things you did really well in the book was to both talk about templates, like how you can use templates, but then also you actually gave the shapes of your templates in the back of the book, which is really helpful, because your writing is clear, which is nice, but to be able to see the template beside the writing, that's what like fully made me understand some of the pots of yours that I've seen those pots for years and couldn't quite figure out how you made them. And then I read the book and I was like, oh, that's how she does it.
Yeah, the templates, there's a lot of them, and they do seem essential in a way to understand the process, but I also think of them as a starting point. And most of my templates, I cut the shape out and then I'm still shaving and adjusting and fitting parts to parts. But yeah, without the templates, I think a lot of those projects would be pretty hard to approach.
Can you talk about in your studio working on a new form, and then how do you get the form right and then make a template to be able to do it again?
Well, I have a lot of different approaches. Maybe one of the easiest to describe is just starting with a sketch. Um, and I do like to draw. I wouldn't say I'm an avid drawer, though. But starting with a sketch can give me a overall shape of a pot. And then that could be something that I start making a bisque mold for. And then once I have that bisque mold, then I can adapt paper to fit over that in order to start creating the slab shapes that would most easily cover part of that three-dimensional mold, which is usually a hump mold, so that then I would have a part to start building this kind of configured piece with.
And actually, as I look behind you, there's bisque molds lining the shelves of your studio.
Yep, and then up there's all my templates in that little file folder system. Yeah, this is my teaching station. So it's like I gotta have everything. I don't know how people teach if it's not really their studio now. I mean, I've still often taught workshops all over the place. Of course, that's not happening at all. And it's like what I can teach now is so much better because I have all the tools, which I would never take these all in a suitcase with me. I mean, I would take two, but to be able to just ad lib and have that sense of flow while I teach has really helped me be a better teacher.
So templates are something you use a lot, and then the bisque molds, as you've mentioned. When you're thinking about teaching someone who's never made a mold at all, how do you first describe why to use a mold? Like what's good about a mold?
I try to describe my molds as a shape library and that they're a tool that you make yourself. And so you're automatically imbuing it with your sensibility, which I think is so cool. It's like it will automatically hold your sense of touch. And then what I really think of it doing at the most basic level is just it's adding volume to your slabs in a way that's repeatable and can be more efficient depending on how you use it and how patient you are and the whole cracking thing. So, but yeah, they're a way for me to have a voluminous form that's made out of slabs that's more complex a little more quickly.
You mentioned cracking, which is an unfortunate part of building with parts. When you have a bisque mold, the mold itself is sucking in moisture, and then depending on what environment you're in, the top side is sucking in moisture. But if you're in Seattle, that's totally different than if you're teaching like at Anderson Ranch in Colorado, where it is like dry as a bone there. So how do you describe that to students in terms, I know drying time is something usually we just say, oh, you just got to test it out. But have you figured any easy ways to explain like monitoring the molds or the slabs on the molds so the cracking doesn't happen?
Well, the molds dry the clay really quickly, even here within 5 or 10 minutes. So I just think of it like babysitting, where you're not setting that child down in front of a TV and walking away. You're just there and engaged. And if you're feeling impatient, then starting another project is a better option because that will like it's just this strange cyclic thing where the more time you spend in the studio and when you stay engaged, then things don't crack. Versus if I'm walking away and oh, I forgot about it and oh, I didn't cover it or I covered it too much or like that whole scenario is really frustrating. So to me, preventing cracking is directly correlated to how much time and attention you have in the studio.
Are there certain forms that you've had to like soak the mold or spray the mold because it's just complex enough that it needs to dry slower?
No, I do. I never have sprayed a mold to make it dry slower. I do have some molds that have an undercut, And for those molds, if the clay were to dry, it would crack and I wouldn't be able to get it off also. So some of the molds, I'm cutting lines into the slab once it's fully secured around the mold in order to let it contract, like a little contraction seam, so that it's able to spread apart. And that way, when I go back and score those seams, I have this clean attachment to compress rather than a sort of cracked, strained area of the clay.
One of the things I hope people do with your book is use it as a textbook, because there's a lot of like very simple images that explain like 30 minutes of talking. And one of those was you went through all the different ways you can join clay. So there's like miter, a reverse miter, all these different ways. But you just arranged 4 cylinders with 4 connections and took a picture, which, we always say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I was like, oh, I wish I'd have had that picture when I was teaching so many times. So could you talk about that? Like the different ways that slabs are joined? Because when you're working with complex forms, sometimes different parts need to be joined different ways, depending on, how they're made.
Yeah, I do really like that part of the book. And I even kept the cylinders that we photographed, displaying those different seams and the connection points, because I want them in my classroom someday when I get to have classes again. I guess I don't quite know how to talk about the seams, but in my work, I'm making lots and lots of connections. And so I'm thinking about, do I want the seam to stand out as part of the process, or do I want it to blend and be more invisible? And I like thinking about that as I'm deciding what kind of curiosity I want to develop in the person looking at my work. Like if everything's obvious, it makes me feel like it doesn't leave as much wondering on the part of the viewer. And I'm interested in that sense of curiosity. But the seams, seem really basic, but the attachment is important. And so having the overlapping seam, I talk about getting a little more surface area, or having the miter joint makes it so that you get this beautiful shadow because the seam comes to a point. And so those are different ways I think about seams and deciding to use them in terms of developing form.
When you think about a form that's vertical, like let's say your pitchers, I know you've made, different sort of pouring vessels over the years, but I think about your large pitcher. There's so many parts that go into that pot. You've got 2 parts of the body, sort of the spout. You've got the handle. I'm trying to think of what else. I feel like there's other parts.
The handle is 2 parts, but yeah, it's a multiple part piece for sure.
Yeah. Can you talk about how you think about asymmetry and symmetry on a vertical plane? Because your pitchers have this nice gesture where they don't feel like they're going to fall over, but there's a lot of moving sort of left or right as you go vertically.
I would say that the pitcher form that I make now is really has been a really long journey. And of course, it started for me with thrown pots and altering thrown pots, which is how the top section of that pitcher is made. And then the bottom section is made with slabs on a bisque mold. And so over the years, I've combined all of the techniques that I do into this one form in order to get that moving shape, which that overall shape of that form really drew from the form of a pelican as it stands on the beach with its head kind of up and its long beak going down and its little backside sticking out. So that was part of that sort of cantilever coming out of the back. And then some of the choices I make, like the little notch at the top of the handle, is to try to incorporate that sense of sideways or movement or cantilever movement throughout the form in order to make it more unified. And the upper portion and the roundness of it was really drawing from my love of the fullness of a sail on a sailboat, where it's just totally full of the wind in this strong but kind of momentary way sometimes. I love that, just such energy from that. So trying to bring in those different elements into one form is where I'm going with some of those decisions.
And in a way, that's that type of pot that has a cantilever top over top of a base. That is like an advanced pottery technique. Like that's something that a beginner, this book can help them understand that. But you've broken it down in a way that makes it seem accessible, which, I think I said this before, but like it's really nice to finally know how you make some of the pots you make. Who is this book for? Like what type of student is this aimed at?
I mean, you saying that it's a more complex form or advanced, I think that that's true, but I also think that the parts I'm working with are all simple. And so it's the arrangement of multiple simple parts that makes the complexity happen. Every single one of those parts is totally approachable if it's broken down and you eat the frog legs first. But my goal would be to write a book, or my goal was to write a book that would be accessible to people who aren't really experienced and give them these projects to work toward, but also kind of challenge people who maybe have been working with clay for a while to try working out of the round or try bisque molds or just explore. My whole goal would be that it just makes people want to explore. Even if they don't end up using that exact technique, maybe it just brings another variety of altering to mind that they had already seen somewhere else. Or, I just want to get that feeling of bubbling exploration.
So it took, quite a while to write the book. You do all this work with the editors to get it published. It finally comes out, what month was it published in?
June.
Okay, of 2020.
Of 2020. Yeah, it was such a lame time to have a book come out in so many ways. I just felt like I couldn't celebrate it, which was a bummer. I've gotten over it. It's okay. But, life just keeps going. But it was really hard to work so hard on something and then, have every single book signing canceled, ones that I was really excited about. So, and I had an exhibition planned around it. And of course that was canceled, and well, on and on and on. Everybody knows, our whole world was canceled. I'm not the only one. I get it, but it's still sad. But I have, had other silver linings, which are, I'm using it in my online classes. And I feel like I never would have had that connection point if coronavirus hadn't happened, because I'm terrified of being on video. I hate it. It's really hard for me. It's getting easier, but it was a really hard thing for me to get over. But that connection of being able to say, we're doing this project together, and here's this support material that you could refer to when you're working on your own. And I think it's worked really well. So that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, and that timing, like when you signed your book contract more than, I guess, 18 months ago, however long ago that was, you never could have seen a global pandemic coming.
Nobody could. Yeah.
In a way, though, it was the perfect timing because you had literally written a textbook, and then you got to discover if you wanted to teach online or not. And you mentioned that you've taught, tons of workshops, lots of traveling. How do you think, though, about teaching online? Like, what's different about teaching online than about a workshop setting when you're there with the people?
Yeah, it is really different. The connection is really different. I'm not, my favorite type of workshop was to teach hands-on workshop more than demonstration workshop, where I can see somebody trying and say this small shift, whatever it would be for them. And then that would make it easier. That part is missing. And hopefully the book can fill in a little bit with some of that, and reruns of the online classes can help. But it's still, this broad distance. And so I miss that, I have to say. I have started a 5-week series class where we meet and I see people and they speak and they show their project, and there's a little bit more of that, and I'm really enjoying that. But most of my workshops are demonstration workshops. I do think I have the benefit of having a lot of practice teaching workshops. And so I know a lot of the questions that will come before they're spoken. And I try really hard to explain things from multiple directions so that it's just as transparent as possible in terms of process.
One of the things we have the advantage of now is that you can record and get online with anything. You can have a phone, you can have an iPad, you can have your computer, a camera, all these things. But that makes it sound way too simple, because I know that you have to figure out camera angles when you're teaching online. You have to figure out camera placement, all these things, sound, like how to sound the best so they're not hearing you slip and score versus hearing you talk. You know, there's all these technical parts. So can you talk about refining sort of your setup for recording and teaching online?
I would say that I am still in that process. It's quite a steep learning curve for me. I would say that when I was learning, I was under incredible panic attack feelings of everything being canceled. And, I pay my mortgage with teaching in ceramics and it was all gone. So I was learning under a pretty large amount of stress, which I would suggest is not the way to learn. And I think it made it a lot harder. But that aside, I just watched YouTubes like a crazy person on everything from what kind of camera to buy to what type of cable to how fast the internet should be. And it was just actually pretty challenging for me. It's not something that I know much about. So I was starting from, even just learning that there's different internet speeds was a new thing for me. Seems really stupid now because it's so obvious, but nothing's obvious at first. Every single step has to be learned. So I guess I'm really grateful for YouTube and all of the people who have shared information on there. And I kind of just dove in hardcore and bought a fancy camera. I bought a Panasonic GH5, which is really great for video, which is what I wanted to do. And I wanted to create high quality video because someday I would like to do something with it, which right now I don't really have the bandwidth for that at all. Like just doing what I'm doing is taking all my time. But anyway, it's a potential. So I got a great camera and I found this really cool DIY kind of octopus looking tripod system that would hold multiple cameras and a second monitor. And I put it all together and it's awesome. And I attached it to this cheap little nightstand type thing that I got at Target, that I put sandbags from my craft fair booth so that it has ballast so it doesn't tip over with my fancy camera on it. And it's actually really cool. And I do have a blog that I wrote about this with links to a lot of the tools that I ended up using or YouTubes that I ended up watching. So that's available if people want to watch that. But really, I ordered a ton of the wrong stuff and sent back a ton of the stuff and then bought more. And it was like this weird tidal flow of HDMI cables. Did you know there's like 6 different kinds of HDMI cables?
Wow, I didn't know that.
There's way too many. There's like a HDMI 1 for like all these different things. Anyway, sort of like USB. There's USB-C, blah, blah, blah. Really boring topic to me, but essentially important nuanced details when it comes to making it all listen to each other and then show you the picture and do the sound all at the same time and all that stuff. So, podcasting has to be really similar where it's like a million cables and getting them all to play nice together isn't fun.
Yeah, and one of the biggest secrets is an Ethernet cable, which you said that that's how you're hooked up to your router or your internet system, which is, I think, so important because if you hardwire, your speed can be like, you can get 400 versus less.
Yeah, mine I think is 800. It's really high, because to live stream, you have to have high upload speed. It doesn't matter what your download speed is. And that's like when you have internet at your home, your upload speed is probably 5, just 5. You're lucky. And your download speed is maybe 40, because most people are receiving information. But when you're trying to put information out into the world, then you need that much higher upload speed. Anyway, that was the first lesson that I learned.
Well, it's a simple one, but if you don't get that one right, like I was so frustrated trying to move my podcast from recording in person to recording on Zoom. And once I figured out the Ethernet, and then I don't know what Zoom requires, but that's what I'm using to record. But if you have, like, say 5 megabytes per second and you have 40 megabytes per second, it's more than 8 times greater the more you have. It's exponentially better the faster it gets, which is just the reality we live in, living in a digital world.
Yeah. And, not only do I want to be able to live stream, but I want to be able to live stream when my partner is home surfing on his computer upstairs, because this is our home and it does more than one thing. Or when people are in my studio, because there's still members coming in just a few at a time. And I want them to actually be able to watch movies as they're trying to do stuff in the studio, because that's how everybody's learning right now. So it's serving me, but it's also serving like my tiny, also larger community.
Yeah, and we should describe for the listener, if they haven't already, they should listen to the original interview we did years ago, because you talked about it in there. But you've essentially built a community where you have a studio, you have a studio that other people can work in, you have assistants, the house is on top of the studio. So, it's almost like a pottery commune in Seattle. So when COVID happened and you had to kind of pull in everything and make it safe, how did Seattle's regulations, but also your conscious and how you wanted people to be safe in your environment, how did that change your workflow?
I shut down 100% for about 2 months. And that was, per Seattle. I mean, Seattle is a pretty liberal city and they took everything quite seriously. And we had a really awesome governor, leading the way. I'm really grateful to have been in Seattle, and we kept our numbers pretty low, even though we were kind of at one of the starting points. Really, we got hit dramatically at the beginning. So everything was shut down, and it was super scary and hard. I mean, I was refunding all of my class tuitions, which was terrifying. I can feel my heart rate increasing just talking about it, actually. And so basically, once things started getting better, the first thing that I did was have my assistants back, because they're a really important relationship in my life. And, the studio is their way of having an existence, right? It's not an after work adventure. It's how they're trying to move forward in the world. So that was what opened first. And then I moved to just having members, which is the monthly access, which I was doing a little bit before, but now. And so then I set up a scheduling system. So people sign on for how much time they want to come to the studio. And I kept it fairly small, so it's not like a scramble to get the 1 hour that you want, because that's not a feeling I'm interested in. And the members are awesome. They're so grateful to have anywhere to go to be creative that feels safe. Everybody helps take care of it by sanitizing when they leave, and everybody wears a mask indoors at all times. And it's worked really well so far. I mean, my goal was to just never have anything happen here, and knock on wood, but that's how it's been so far. And I feel really grateful to have a space that can be shared in a safe way. And it's just such a small entity that it wasn't actually as hard to navigate that, I think, as organizations that have hundreds of people who might be wanting to come. And then how do you decide? And it's just so much harder when it's larger as an organization, I think. So size is important. And I've learned a lot about that this year.
If we think about 2020 as being this sort of three-pronged experience, you finish your book, which you had worked on for, more than a year. COVID happens, you're transitioning your business, you're teaching, all that. And then there's a lot of social unrest that was due to basically police murders and police brutality. So can you talk about how you dealt with the third thing, how you dealt with learning about diversity and inclusion, inequity in your business as your personal response to larger political protests? Because not every business owner thinks, this is my premise, not every business owner cares. Like, not every business owner thinks they need to change their business and their life to adjust to social changes. So can you talk about how you were thinking about that and what you've done to implement those things in your life?
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation, and one that could happen with every person, regardless of if you have a business or don't have a business. And one of the things I did was just try to start learning and owning my own participation in a system that upholds a group of people and pushes down other groups of people in a way that feels intentional if you really start looking at it. And it made me feel just sick to think that I was complicit in that, and I don't want to be. I can feel myself getting emotional about it. My mom's parents immigrated here from Romania, and they're white, but I understand from my family's perspective the feeling of not fitting in. And one of my loves of clay is that a studio atmosphere has the potential to be this bridge between different groups of people, which I think is such an incredible relationship building tool. And so, yeah, I would say that I'm focusing on learning by reading. I read White Supremacy and Me, and right now I'm reading Nonviolent Communication, which is such a great book about how to have conversations where you're not being directive, which can be a form of violence. And I'm also trying to be much more aware of the art field and asking questions of my own field. Like, when I am asked to teach, one of the questions I ask now is, are you also seeking instructors who are underrepresented in our community and underinvited? And same thing when I jury, or just trying to bring that conversation into our field through multiple ways in my small way that I can. So that's one thing I'm doing. A fun thing we're doing here at the studio is every Thursday we get together and do professional development, and we're reading this book, In the Company of Women. And it's this awesome book that interviews women in all fields of the arts and asks them questions about, what did they dream of being as a child and how do they define success? And to hear that perspective from multiple people has been really edifying and kind of building up our morale. And also just hearing from so many different voices is important.
I think one of the reasons that individual people and business owners sometimes feel like that they don't even want to tackle this topic is because it seems too big. It seems like, well, yes, we live in a racist system, but what can I do about it? Like, what positive change can I make? And I was having feelings like that in August or July or sometime after the protest had started. I'd started to read. I'd started to sort of increase my intake of books written by intellectuals that think about race and class and society. But one day I was flipping through my email and I noticed in the back of your newsletter, you put just a quick list of the things you had been doing. And that day, that was what I needed to keep pushing forward, because I was feeling like, what can I do? I can't do anything. This is all too big for me. So I wanted to just tell you that, to thank you, that sometimes that little paragraph in the back of your newsletter can be that thing that kind of helps the next person keep going. So thanks for that.
Thanks. I mean, I need encouragement too. And I feel really lucky. I'm on the board of Pottery Northwest, and they're offering the board, residents, and their larger community equity trainings, which are awesome because part of it is not just reading, but speaking about it to people and real people that you know, not thinking about it in your head, in my head only. I mean, I need to be able to verbalize and vocalize my thoughts and opinions and be told, you know, like, this is where this could be coming from, or here's another way. And that's been really helpful for me. And I also took a class with Wanderwell, which is a small business in Philadelphia, on being an anti-capitalist business. I mean, there's a whole bunch of awesome resources. And I don't know, I've just gotten so much out of it. And I just think, actually, I agree that being a small business, a tiny business in this large world that we live in, can feel so, like, I can feel like I just can't make any difference, and it's really can get me down. But I just have to believe that every person taking a step matters. I mean, that's how I built this studio. I never would have dreamed of being able to have a home. But, you know, like one cup at a time, you know, you like save a down payment, one class at a time. And that's how this feels. It feels like one lesson at a time and one recognition at a time. We're going to change the world that we live in, and that's important.
Yeah. And I appreciate you talking about this, because I feel like we just need to have these conversations every, I don't know, like 6 weeks and just kind of check in about what we're doing to help versus hurt. I think the biggest, most important thing for me has just been consistency and accepting that, like, I don't have to have an answer, and I don't have to push you to have an answer either. Like, it's more that the conversation is productive, and eventually we're going to find the right steps to have equity and more inclusion. And, you know, we have diversity in the field. We just need to listen to the diversity and encourage it, as opposed to minimalize it and marginalize it.
I mean, I think that me learning about this on my own would be harder, but having a facilitator guide me as an individual, or me participating in a group, has been really important. So, and that has to do with that listening, where they're telling and I'm saying, oh.
And can you remind me the name of that organization that you did the workshops with?
Well, one of them is through Wanderwell, which is a business that helps small businesses with lots of different concerns, you know, from bookkeeping to this organizing your business in a different mindset kind of class. And then the other one I'm taking is through Pottery Northwest, and I actually don't know the name of the organization off the top of my head, but it's an organization that offers this service to work with nonprofits. And this is the second one I've done with Pottery Northwest, and it's the exact same class, and I still feel like I'm learning a ton.
To wrap up, can you plug how people could get in touch? Well, first, we got to plug the book, where they can get the book, and then how they can get in touch with you to talk about any of this stuff.
My book is available on my website, and also anywhere that sells books, all over the internet, of course. And I also have a downloadable PDF of 2 projects that didn't fit in my book, which is also on my website, and you can request it there, and I'll just email it to you. My website is ratcitystudios.com. It's named after my studio here in White Center, Seattle. And you could also find information about me online on my Instagram, which is @Deb's Pottery. And there's links from that bio to my book, to my website, to my online teaching, or a contact page.
Well, thanks for doing this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. It's really fun talking to you. I wish we lived closer. And I love my new cup.
Oh, thank you so much for getting that. I'm glad you enjoy it.
I love it. Yeah, it's such a good, generous teacup.
Well, thanks.
Take care.
I'd like to thank Deb for coming on the show. Always a pleasure to catch up with her. Also wanted to give one more plug for today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of the Pot LA GoFundMe campaign. This studio needs your help to keep their doors open for the next 6 months as they have been directly affected by the COVID pandemic. If you'd like to support them, you can do so at gofundme.com/help-pot. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.